Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Aaron Swartz podcast. We are here today. We've got a number of guests and a number of really exciting topics that we're going to discuss. I have to wait a second while I get the link from my producer and put it on the blog site and Twitter and Blue Sky, so that people have the exact link. And I've been told, oh, good, it's here. So we'll do that first really quick. And that's just, oops. All right. And that. All right. And then I've got our Twitter. For those of you in the future, you have not come across a podcast from 2005. This is to 2025. And we're just old school. Okay, and here's the Twitter link. Yay. All right. So, it's really nice to be here and be able to be together on days like today, the 12th anniversary of Aaron's suicide. Always a sad day, but it also gives us a chance to get together and fight like hell for the stuff that he fought for. So I've been talking a lot with the members of the community. Andre Sobral here from Aaron Swartz Institute Brazil has been my co-host last year, and our special guest today is Gavin Grimm. Gavin, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, and I'm going to let Gavin introduce himself and talk about his work in a moment. But Gavin is actually going to be coming on as a second co-host, and we're really excited about that. And we'll be doing at least one show a month, if not two shows a month in 2025, because there's a lot going on, a lot to talk about. And we really want to promote the next generation of Aarons, future Aarons, other, teenage activists and stuff. And Gavin was fighting for the rights of everyone, really, with the Supreme Court case that he did a couple years ago. Even though he was very young and you would think perhaps easily pushed around and bullied like the bullies like to do. But Gavin stood up for all of us and won a very important case. And I'll let him tell you about that too a little bit later. So Gavin, welcome to the show. Let us know your thoughts, introduce yourself a little bit, just kind of take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for including me. I am humbled to be a part of this today on this somber anniversary, but I'm feeling very enriched knowing the legacy that I step into here. And again, I say just very grateful to be part of this. So for the background, I suppose, on who I am and to some extent why I'm here, I will mention the Supreme Court case shortly. However, I want to back up a little bit before even that and start when I was even younger and when I first learned about the legacy of Aaron Swartz. I think I must have been probably around 11 or 12, and the internet, I had never found social space among my peers, and so the internet very naturally was where I went. And one thing that became apparent to me very immediately upon receiving unbridled access to the internet was that there was a massive community of virtually anything you could ask for out there, and that was important, and that would become even more important as the world continued to spin in the coming years. And at the time, one of the bills that was going around, I think it was SOPA and FOSTA was the names of those bad bills back then, that they claimed to be to protect children online. They were transparently cyber surveillance bills that would erode our rights to privacy in general. And that was the context in which I first started hearing the name Aaron Swartz. And I came across his story through the context or through the description of the JSTOR articles and the retaliation that the United States government levied on him as a result. And it really, I'm a very emotional person, for which I make no apologies. So I'm already starting tuning up in my throat, but
no problem.
It just felt profound to me at that time in my life when I was, 11 or 12 years old, where I found myself with a lot of ideas about what a good, just world looked like, and also realized that those ideas weren't necessarily the world we had in practice. And however, that there was a way to make these two pictures come together. And the way to do that was just to care a lot about it and fight to that end because it was the right thing to do, not because it was lucrative, not because it was particularly easy for me to get involved at 12 years old when, people don't take 12-year-olds seriously about what they want for dinner. They're not going to, take me seriously about my bleeding heart about the nature of the internet and, and surveillance capitalism. But Aaron's story just showed me that you don't need to wait for anybody's permission to do what you know is the right thing to do. And that was so important to me at that time in my life. It was the first time I had heard about anybody willing to risk basically everything just for the principles that they held in a modern setting, in this modern day. When we often trivialize these things and say, oh, who cares if this bill passes? It's, it's the internet. This was a sacred space for me at 12. I cared a lot about it. And so I think that my induction into politics via the Aaron Swartz brand of you do the right thing because you can set me on the path that would ultimately lead me to do exactly that a few years later when I was 15 years old. And my high school banned me from the boys' bathroom. I was going to Gloucester High School at the time. I believe this began in 2014. I returned to my sophomore year of high school as a male student, having transitioned over the summer before. And so when we approached the leadership in school, we meaning myself and my mother primarily, we basically said, this is Gavin. He is a boy. This is who he is. How are you going to protect him in this space? Not, can I be here and be myself? Would it be okay if I showed up being who I am? We said, this is exactly who I am. And your responsibility is to protect me. And how is that going to happen? Unfortunately, the school's response was that it was not going to happen, and my options were either to be forced into the girls' restrooms or to essentially not have a workable restroom solution at the bathroom at all. So I was living in Gloucester, Virginia. It's a fairly small, not incredibly tiny, but still fairly small town, incredibly conservative in their social mindsets in general. There was not really, it wasn't a welcoming space for a person like me. But the good news was, I had already learned at that point that I didn't need to ask permission to exist as I was, nor did I need to ask permission to make space for myself in any room I happen to find myself in, because I'm here and I deserve that space. And so it was that mindset that led me to say, when the school came back to me and said, you won't be allowed in the bathrooms at all, essentially, instead of my response being, well, shucks, that really is a shame. I guess I'll go homeschool, or I guess I'll, I guess I'll just listen to them and smile about it. And not to disparage anybody who is not in a position to fight back. I have to say, the support of my mother meant that I could. I was 15 years old. If she didn't want me dealing with this, I would not have had the ability whatsoever. But thankfully, I had that support. And so my response when they told me that was, all right, what media organization do I call up? Because this is not going to happen. So that began my lawsuit with the American Civil Liberties Union. When I was first named as the defendant, I could not have my full name on the docket because I was 15 years old. And by the time the lawsuit resolved, I think I was 19 or 20 years old and had long graduated high school, but it ended in a victory for my side for civil rights, I would say, which looks like we went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, we're not going to take your case. So the appellate court ruling still stands. And the appellate court ruling before that point had been a positive one in my favor. And so in all of the Fourth Circuit of the United States of America, technically, this legal question has been asked and answered regarding where can transgender students use the bathroom. And the answer to that is the appellate court has decided that transgender students use the bathroom where they feel safest. Or more specifically, no school can legally require transgender students to only use bathrooms related to their sex assigned at birth, or else that is explicitly discrimination. And so that is still the legal precedent that has been on the books since the outcome of my case. There have been other cases. Case law isn't incredibly I wish it was a bit more linear in that way. We have plenty of individual governors or areas which are not respecting those rules, and it just takes another person to have another lawsuit, unfortunately, to resolve that kind of thing. But that being said, the precedent has been set, and for that I'm very grateful, incredibly grateful that I had the ability to participate in that during those formative years where I was learning what was important.
Yeah. Oops, you just went quiet there. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. That was me. So that was really important work. And you had mentioned when you were a kid that you ran across Aaron and his story, and tell us about your own personal experience with Aaron.
Absolutely. So I have always been really concerned with what is right and fair and good and just, and it was I mean, I must have been, if I think back to where I spent my time online back in those days, I may have been on Reddit, I may have been on Tumblr, I don't know exactly where. But it was during the discussion of one of those protect children online bills that were just cyber surveillance bills that I heard his name first mentioned. And the story I then read was about his actions with uploading the JSTOR documents, as well as helping with founding Creative Commons and Reddit. And it was, I remember, I spent probably an evening looking up what I could, and somehow the news that he had lost his life, I think less than a year prior, escaped me until 2 or 3 hours into my little study session. And it hit me when I read that. I was so excited that this guy was out there, that this guy was making these important waves in the world, and it hit me that he wasn't. And I remember so clearly how angry I was, because it does not take a particularly discerning individual to understand that when he did get in trouble, the United States government did everything it could to make sure he was absolutely terrified and felt that there was nothing left, no options left, where he was not incarcerated for an incredibly long amount of time under circumstances that, quite frankly, nobody should endure, for the crime of believing sincerely that information should be free and accessible to everybody, and that kind of world is a world that brings us forward to progress. It helps people. It saves lives. The aggregation of information in a free space allows all of us to be better and do better and build better. And for the crime of believing wholeheartedly that that is the world we should live in, our government responded by trying to do absolutely everything in their power to make sure that an Aaron Swartz never happened again. And I realized then that we had to do everything we could as people who care about this world we live in to make sure that as many of them as possible, as many Aaron Swartz as possible, as many people as possible could carry on this legacy, so that there was never again an easy way to silence the attitude of free information in general.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's really that sad story that you tell about finding him online and being like, oh, wow, this is such a great person, and learning and learning and learning. And then you get to the part finally when you find out, oh, they're actually dead, because it doesn't seem like he could possibly be dead in the beginning because he's so young. And this happens to people all the time to this day, especially now that a lot of new people are actually coming across Aaron for the first time. It's been long enough, that people kind of are being reintroduced to him now. So you are exactly, and your attitude about doing whatever you have to do, to change things is exactly the kind of attitude and the kind of work that we want to promote here. And so that's why, and I didn't know all of this actually when I asked you to come on the show yet. You were one of the future Aarons that I wanted to protect. And I didn't know that actually you had been genuinely inspired by him in your life. So it was really, really heartfelt to learn about all that. And and I just did want to make the point that although Aaron did want, he wanted the articles to be available, that he mainly was going to do research on them, and he actually didn't, although he didn't break any laws, as I wanted to make sure that everyone's clear. He was an ethics fellow at Harvard at the time, and Harvard and MIT had contracts about employees downloading as much as they want. So moving forward, Gavin, you are very, very informed on many topics. It was really interesting talking to you when we were getting together before the show to think about what we wanted to talk about on the show. And you have some very, very shrewd observations in terms of, a lot of talk lately about diversity, the Supremes throughout affirmative action and those kinds of decisions, because this whole thing about, well, I guess like Stephen Colbert used to say, well, since racism doesn't exist anymore and sexism doesn't exist and homophobia doesn't exist, I guess we can just forget about all those laws that protect those people now, is literally what people are saying. Well, it's what the Republicans have been saying, but the Democrats are so confused in their own identity crisis, no pun intended, that you can't tell. They're not actually trying to do anything to make headway. They're in maintaining the status quo doesn't work if you're losing a little every year. That all you're doing is maintaining and you're never pushing forward. Then we're never going to get ahead. And it was really, really interesting observation. And so I asked Gavin to go into a little more detail about that. And you can always ask questions, and we'll take care of them right in the course of the discussion. And so, Gavin, let us know what you've been thinking about.
Yeah, so I recently wrote an article for the Bay Area Reporter. I was asked to talk about the election of Sarah McBride and how I thought that essentially boded for the future of the transgender community. And I didn't have, I think probably the most positive part of my article was that she had yet to be sworn in, and so we had lots of time to wait and see what she did. But in writing that article, I watched probably every interview that she's done in the last half a year or longer, available in public at least. I read all of them, almost certainly. And what strikes me in her words, it is the same thing that I noticed, for example, in the presidential debate with Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, where when the mention of healthcare for transgender people who are incarcerated was brought up, it was like a poison dart. She wanted nothing to do with it. She didn't want to say, yes, in fact, I do support incarcerated people receiving healthcare, and that is a part of healthcare. I mean, it was just Democrats have treated it. Whereas they were the party of, ostensibly of progress and of trans support. It has been something that most of them seem very comfortable to distance themselves with in the recent years. And so with Sarah McBride as an example, the thing that I noticed in her discussions was that, first of all, she said not only was she not concerned with being banned from the restrooms on Capitol Hill, but in fact, if anybody had asked her opinion before they banned her from the bathrooms, she would have been happy to tell them that in fact she didn't intend to use the women's restrooms there at all, because I assume she didn't want the problem. She didn't want to create controversy. Perhaps she didn't want to make anybody uncomfortable. And so it's this example of compliance in advance that the Democrats continue to bring us. And the message to me is, it doesn't matter that there's a transgender person in Congress. Sarah McBride is very clear, in my opinion, that she does not want to be known as the transgender congresswoman. She does not want to be known as a transgender rights leader who is in this high, office. In fact, the further away from the concept of trans activist that she can possibly get, the more comfortable she seems to be.
In fact, she's on their side.
Right. And so that brings us back to the question of, what good does it materially do communities like mine who are sincerely concerned about, will I have access to health care? Perhaps will my child have access to health care? Will I have the legal right to change my name in another few months or years? These fairly existential and in many cases life or death questions for our community seems trivial to the closest thing we have to representation in Congress. And so, of course, my take on that is that, in fact, it doesn't matter if the person who is elected is a trans person or not. What matters is that we have people who are vocal in their support of trans people, and they don't use it as a bargaining chip the minute that they feel like it's necessary, which is I name any one, and there you go. I mean, any other Democratic Congress member, and it's a bargaining chip. It's the thing that's it's taken off the table as soon as there's even a modicum of pushback, and it's been that way for, in my estimation, at least 4 years, and for a bit longer. That trend has been very obvious. So I think it couldn't be. It's not even a particularly symbolic victory, in fact, to have a transgender person in Congress who is openly saying, I don't intend to rock the boat in any way, shape, or form.
Right. And just to be clear on what she should be doing, she should be using the bathroom of her choice, getting arrested if she needs to use the bathroom of her choice.
And just to pop in real quick, there was a group of activists.
It's your talk.
Good point. I'm still getting used to it. Raquel Willis, I believe Chelsea Manning was part of the action. Several other activists got arrested in those bathrooms for standing up for what she absolutely refused to stand up for, like a day or two after she made that announcement that she was going to comply in advance. And in fact, if anybody asked her, she would have never asked to use the women's restroom in the first place. How silly. Immediately following, it just burns me up, because she said in many interviews, I want to talk about what matters to my constituents. Are trans people not your constituents? Are people who love trans people not your constituents? Her language trivializes the issues that transgender people face, and to hear that coming from within our own community it is, I can't imagine I can't imagine anything more disheartening than this being the state of the most progressive politics we have available to
Yeah.
us in our formal institutions.
Yeah. It'd be basically like Martin Luther King saying, shut up and do what you're told. You
Right.
know?
I would never use the white bathroom. I would never. I mean, can you even, I can't even fathom it.
They're both segregated spaces. Like, why do we need gender in bathrooms? Like, the vase is different, or the sink, or
I tend to agree. I would love to see floor to ceiling stalls and, urinals on one side, stalls on the other. Especially you get airports, they've got all the hand washing right in the middle. I think that's lovely. I don't know, but it's just another way to wage a culture war for people who want to incite these kinds of conflicts.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, and the idea also, because how she, there's a whole other way that she could have played this. Again, she could have turned it into a power play, because it's a valuable thing for the Republicans to have is she technically Democrat or Republican? I don't even know.
I believe she's a registered Democrat.
She's technically Democrat. Okay.
Technically
she
a
says
Democrat.
Crazy shit all the time, so I didn't think she was, maybe. But she could do that thing where she goes independent and becomes a swing vote, and then they'd be like, even the transgender congressperson voted for our thing. You know what I mean? Like, she could have really spun this to get more, self-serving power in Congress, and to neuter herself, basically. Bad choice of words, Lisa. to take the air out of her own sails before she's even sworn in. And I didn't really notice this was happening until you brought it up. I got to tell you.
She approached the bench with her hands up saying, I'm not a threat to the establishment. I'm not a threat to the status quo. You don't have to worry about me. And it's difficult for anybody in my position to take heart in such a presentation.
Yes. Yeah. So what else? Are there any other examples of people like this, do you think, that are anybody who already has given up the fight that hasn't even been sworn in yet? I mean, how bad is it?
Well, as far as our incoming individuals, I think a similar sentiment applies to what I wrote in the Bay Area Reporter, which is, I say very strong and arguably negative words at the moment. However, they all have lots of time to prove us right or wrong, or probably right. And so we will allow them to do that, give them a couple weeks, maybe a month before, and not that I'm going to hold my breath, but right, exactly. But here's the time to prove us wrong. If you are actually going to challenge the establishment, the status quo, or if you're going to make things better for Americans, the clock has started, and we will see. And I want to acknowledge as well that any Democratic congressperson, anyone either newly in or has been in there for a while, they've got a bit of an uphill battle with the climate, or with the political climate that we face in the next 4 years. So I don't want to act like, oh my God, it would be so easy for these people to just skip around and rainbowify the White House, and it would be a one-day project, and it's so easy. But again, there is something to be said about approaching it saying, I am not here to disrupt what already exists. I'm not here to disrupt the status quo. I'm not here to challenge your policies on the bathroom. I will cooperate with them. In fact, I will draft the statement itself. I will tell you, I won't ever use the girls' bathroom, the women's restroom. I'll in advance tell you how, in fact, you can segregate me away from my peers. And I think I've I've said most of my thoughts on that.
And we'll put a link to your story in the YouTube description, and in the in the blog post and everywhere, so everybody can see this this really interesting article, and be able to read firsthand the kind of things that you're talking about. Okay, well, that's super interesting, Gavin. Thank you so much. We're gonna bring Gavin back a little bit in the show. I mean, he'll be here the whole time, because he's co-hosting. But he's going to give us another sort of a presentation, a discussion about, sorry guys, climate change. Wah wah. So we're in the middle, we're watching the world burn right now. I'm here in California, not Southern California, where the shit's hitting the fan really badly, but I'm used to watching the world burn. I have a whole routine now of I have my masks and stuff by the door. I check the air quality before I leave the house every day. Like, that's life now. And it's never going to change, it's only going to get worse, or I should say it's not going to get better. So it's good to have procedures in place. We'll be talking a lot about that this coming year, especially we've got our first bird flu popped up. That's something we've been waiting for a few months. It actually took a while, but the bird flu is on the way, so we have that to look forward to. So lots of fun stuff to look forward to in 2025. But with the climate, we really are the last defense in terms of our generation's people alive today. Pick which one you want. We do have a responsibility of trying to do whatever can be done to try to, calm this down. It's going to be a shit show the next 4 years because the United States will probably pull out of all the, Trump is going to Trump. He's going to do what he did last time. I don't think it's too critical to say that. And but we don't want to be irresponsible and forget about it, because that's how we got here. So Gavin's going to help us understand kind of specifics about things that happened last year and maybe about things that we can do to help this year. So that's coming at the end. That's going to come about 3:45 probably. And then at 3:30, we've got, I am so sorry, but I'm going to have to make sure that I have his name correct, because it's a really cool thing that he did. And I'm so embarrassed when I do shit like this. Pablo Penachin. Penachet, maybe. I'm sorry. Pablo's going to be here at 3:30 to tell us about this Aaron Swartz statue that's being done. And he got funding for it. It's a beautiful marble statue that will be unveiled December 7th at the Internet Archive in an event that night. And he's going to come on to tell us about that at 3:30. And so now, for the next half hour or so, we're going to talk about Bolsonaro. And some of you are going to be like, well, maybe not. My crowd's probably going to know who Bolsonaro is. I was probably the only bozo that didn't really have, until earlier this year, that really didn't have a full grasp of the crazy situation that's been going on in Brazil for a while. But basically, they have a better president now. Or is it not president? Is it president?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So they have a better president now. But they're finding out things, even more crazy stuff that Bolsonaro did while he was in office. And again, much like we have in this country, when we have someone that was running for office that will now be president soon, who is who has been convicted of multiple felonies and things like that. Brazil is working on maybe taking Bolsonaro to task. And it could be, something to take notes about. So that's why I asked Andre to come and talk to us about that. And take it away, Andre.
Okay. Let me set up my presentation. But while I'm doing this, I can talk a little bit about my history with Aaron. It's not as touching as Gavin's, but I can try to make it more interesting than it was. So since I was a kid in Brazil, Aaron isn't really something very palpable or close to us. And I had one thing that was very close to him, that is my wish to change the world. So many kids believe when they're young that it is possible to change things and that you can one day become president or do something incredible or heroic that can change everything. And that made me go to sociology. So I did a reverse path that Aaron started in computer science and got interested in sociology, to the point of putting in his Twitter bio that he was an applied sociologist. I did the opposite path. I came to sociology and then got interested in computer science, and then did my master's and PhD studying how people use technology. And when I heard about Aaron's death, was a very busy time at Brazil, because we're having this massive street protests. And it was just because of the internet and how it has this power to connect people. People were like protesting tariff increase on transports, and they were like getting organized, and there was all this energy. So it was a very interesting time to have lost someone like Aaron, at the same time that the way he saw the world was getting more real and more palpable to everyone. And since then, I was always hearing about Aaron like he was some kind of genius martyr. And I don't like this kind of discussion about Aaron, because he was as human as anyone, and he was very passionate. And that's what we should remember, not him as some kind of different kind of individual. No, he was just like us and had the same problems and had the same passion. So we have to think of him like that too. And since 2013, I have been learning more and more about Aaron, to the point that I just got so engaged in his view of how knowledge should be accessible to everyone, including, we are quoted by Aaron in his text, Paulo Freire is one of the Brazilian educators that he got inspired by, and he quotes in his text. Aaron also talks about the global south when he talks about knowledge. So I sort of feel seen by Aaron, and this is very important to me now that I'm trying to write a book about him, that I will be telling how it goes here from time to time. So going to Bolsonaro, I don't think Aaron has anything to do with Bolsonaro, but at the same time, we see so many things that are happening these days, and internet is responsible for a lot of them. So
right, it's not that Aaron. It's that we're fighting we're fighting back, and this is how Brazil fought back against Bolsonaro, and so it's an important use case to study, so that we can fight back like Aaron did. So that's the connection.
Yeah, exactly. Let's see how we can understand.
It's there, damn it! It's there. It's there. Okay.
So when I opened this discussion with this headline from DW, that is, did Bolsonaro conspire to assassinate Lula? It's very straightforward. And the answer is the federal police of Brazil thinks so. So let's see what they have on it. First, Bolsonaro, the Brazilian former president, he was indicted by the federal police, and he was in his story, I mean, he was, since he was young, a parachute official from the army. And he was expelled from the army because he was plotting a terrorist attack, like to blow up a military office because of salary increases and things like that. So Bolsonaro already has a past with this kind of extreme actions. So we shouldn't be surprised what we're going to see here. But it's incredible anyway. So you all know that Trump attempted in the January 6th, this kind of rally around the Congress that invaded. Brazil had the same, but in the January 8th, 2 years later. And we are learning through this investigation that this was not a coincidence. And there is a story, an interesting story of why do that. So that's going to be a very interesting bridge to do for the American audience. So this is a picture of the day that they invaded and destroyed the Brazilian Congress. And this has to do also with a helper. Like Brazil, you, as a president, have the right to have helpers, people that are trying to set up your agenda, do chores for you and things like that. And Bolsonaro had this guy named Mauro Cid that was a military man also as a helper for him. And during the COVID pandemic, he asked this Mauro Cid to help him get a certificate of vaccination so he could come to the America for events, like diplomatic events, because they weren't letting anyone unvaccinated there. So he got a friend to insert in the system that Bolsonaro was vaccinated, because Bolsonaro was anti-vax, totally anti-vax. So when he went to this trip and came back and we saw that he was vaccinated, according to the records, but he said that he wasn't. That created an opportunity to investigate him. And this investigation led to the confiscation of the smartphone from this Mauro Cid. And that's when everything hit the fan, because in the smartphone, there were many dialogues and things that led to this plot coming to light and the coup attempt being very clear. So the federal police so far indicted 37 people, from which 25 are military. So 5 people have been arrested, and from these 5, 1 is a policeman and 4 are military persons. Arrested because they're planning an assassination on the Judge de Moraes, that is a Supreme Court judge in Brazil, but also Lula, the president, our current president, and the vice president, that is Geraldo Alckmin. So we're trying to see here how they go from confiscating a phone to uncovering a plot that wanted to kill major public figures. So what happened was that the military was getting desperate because things were moving very fast, and they wanted to do this coup before it was too late. They were organizing this idea that you needed to create public commotion. So they organized almost like camps, sittings in front of army bases to ask for intervention. So it would appear that a lot of people wanted the army to take a stance. So they were like discussing in these meetings if they should do the coup before public support appeared or wait for public support to do the coup. And they were discussing, if you wait too long, Lula may win the election.
I love it. It's like a focus group. It's like a coup focus group.
I don't know. So they have this discussion if they should do the coup or not. And the Navy general, the commander of the Navy in Brazil, he is called Almir Garnier. He said that he was in the coup and he would do anyway. Whatever happened, he was in and he was going to help. He even sent messages saying that the tanks were ready to go to the streets. And at the same time, you have the Air Force and the Army not so sure, because America was saying very adamantly that they wouldn't support a coup in Brazil. So there was this split, and they are trying to create a plan that could overcome any kind of doubts. And they called the plan Green and Yellow Dagger. That's like a very lame name, but it's their activity and their aesthetics. You can see how they're very inspired.
It's like if they had only hired a better PR firm, would the coup have taken place? Carry on. So
they had this discussion. Was this amateur or this professional coup? The police identified 6 groups. They had people to spread disinformation about the electoral system. You can see this kind of attacks here too. You see a group determined to gather military support. So they were like trying to delegitimize any kind of military people that were against the coup. You have a group for judicial support. So there are attorneys writing things to try to justify a coup. They had this group, operational logistics, that would support these campments in front of the bases, trying to make it easier to happen. They had this parallel spying agency. So they have people being paid to spy on the authority figures. And they had this higher command organization that was like the generals that were going to participate in the coup and how they would do this, how they would convince other politicians to support it. And they want to do this coup with a schedule, so very organized, on December 15. So why didn't it happen? Because they were plotting to assassinate the Supreme Court Judge de Moraes and the President Lula and Vice President Alckmin at almost the same time, in a very short window of time. But when they were plotting this, they thought maybe it will fail. So they prepared also a contingency plan to send Bolsonaro to other country, that he could escape if something went wrong. So there was everything set, everything ready, and what went wrong? What went wrong was that last minute change in the schedule of Judge de Moraes made him not meet the soldiers in the front of the palace that he was working on. And they were unsure if they would get support to such a extreme thing. They had the guns, they're discussing it on a messaging app, if they would shoot him or if they would do something else. And they see that the timing is off because Judge de Moraes was not there yet. The meeting was postponed. There was some last minute change in the agenda. So they say, let's abort it for now. It was so stupid, the thing, that they had one of the involved military men go walking and take a cab to another place to try to leave the assassination zone, the planning zone. So there's lots of stupid mistakes being done in this day, and that made it look like a lot of like amateur job, but there was not really that much problems so that you can call it amateur. It was just like coincidence. And then you have this idea: if we lost the date and the assassination is not as well supported as we thought, maybe we should have some kind of proof of force. That's why they set up January 8th as the test of popular support. So we don't know if the American January 6th has anything to do with popular support testing, but that's a plausible way of thinking about it. Like, why do a demonstration where we invade Congress? To see if everyone would applaud it or would be against it.
Right. They may have had other things planned.
So now we have the same thing happening, that the investigation is going forward, and the more you get people to talk about it and get other phones to investigate, the more we learn about it. So Brazil vice president candidates in Bolsonaro campaign is Braga Neto. It's one of the generals, and he was Brazil defense minister during Governo Bolsonaro government. And Braga Neto, he was like indicted. He was like investigated by the police because one of the messages suggests that he was the man that was carrying the money to pay the assassins for Judge de Moraes' assassination. So he got preventively arrested. So now we have Bolsonaro as the next one in line, probably being arrested, but we are not sure yet how long it will take. Why? Because the preventive arrest is just to make sure he's not going to stop investigations or do anything to make it more complicated. And now, what's the next steps? We have a prosecutor general in Brazil, someone that will try to see if the case is sound, if you have to push it to the Supreme Court, because now it's just a federal police investigation. And this is Gonet, the prosecutor general, and he was chosen by Lula because every president can choose his prosecutor general. And most likely there will be a judgment from the Supreme Court with the first group. There is like two groups in the Supreme Court. And the first group is mainly of people chosen by Lula. There are like 4 people that were chosen by Lula's party during his government, because he stayed 8 years, now he's back. So he is doing almost 12 years of government if he finishes everything. And one of the judges was chosen by Fernando Henrique Cardoso, that was a president from the 90s. And he was not really as left-wing as Lula, but was a moderate liberal president. So it's very unlikely that Bolsonaro would escape a judgment in the Supreme Court. The 2 judges Bolsonaro appointed won't be on the first group of the Supreme Court. And Bolsonaro tried to argue that he is going to be unfairly judged because the judges are appointed by Lula, but the judges understand that this is a crime against the state, not against Lula, and not against a Supreme Court judge like De Moraes that was being plotted to be assassinated. So they think that he should be judged as any other kind of attack on the country, and not as a person with a grudge against one judge specifically.
Okay.
So that's the crazy things that are happening in Brazil now. And we are expecting that in this year, early this first semester, things will move faster because holidays are over and the judges and the Congress are already going back to work. So we're going to see what's going to happen. But this is one way we can think about this kind of crimes. They are not made in a vacuum. They have supporters, they have communications, they have messages. And this is one way of imagining a different path for this kind of violations, trying to find where the things are organized and where they're like set up and how they met and things they schedule.
Right. So they're still investigating and then is the idea they're going to prosecute him, that he might actually be arrested? Is that what we're hoping for?
Yeah, that's probably what's going to happen. The prosecution is deciding if they're going to give it to the Supreme Court. And once they do that, that will probably be shortly, the Supreme Court will decide judging Bolsonaro, most likely guilty because of the composition of the court.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you for that information. It doesn't really, it kind of sounds more like a movie when you're discussing it, like a, like a Keystone Cops KGB kind of thing or something, but this is really happening, folks, in Brazil. And it's really amazing, actually, how much they get away with, just like, what we're experiencing now, or what we experienced in the past and what we're about to experience. Yeah. And, so thank you for that. This is great that Pablo came on a little early, because we're actually, we're ready for you, Pablo.
Amazing.
We just finished our talk about Bolsonaro, and we're it's perfect timing. So
perfect timing.
Everybody, I'd like to introduce Pablo Peniche. All right, great. I like getting names right, even though I look like an idiot when I don't have them wrong to begin with. So Pablo Peniche.
Name, actually.
Huh?
Portuguese last name, actually.
Oh, neat. Okay, great. You tell us, I wanted to know how you got the idea to do the statue. How, let me say this again. Okay, sorry. I'm going to just start over, because then it won't be so bad when I clip it out, right? Everybody, live people, sorry, I'm an idiot. Okay. So how did you initially get the idea to make this statue, and tell us a little bit about that and your connection to Aaron and your story?
Yeah. Well, it's been a while. I first came across Aaron when I was like way younger. I'm 27, with his anti-SOPA campaign. And I just thought that was sort of like one of this pivotal moments in the internet that things could have gone really bad. And recently we've seen sort of like all this encroachment of like attacks on the internet in all these different ways, and how also culture in general like got really sharp and sort of like infighting and like all these sides. And I always felt that like the tech bro crowd used to have sort of like these core values, like freedom of speech, freedom of access to information, and privacy. And even despite political divisions between the tech bros, like a lot of people kind of agree on those. And it felt like more and more people kept forgetting those, and like on quote unquote both sides of like I don't know, I just don't like these terms of left wing and right wing, which I just think they're kind of fake, but
they are fake. That's why you don't like them.
Yes, but I don't know, I've seen it on both sides, sort of like this forgetting one of them and then maybe just keeping one of them for their side. And I like this old Bitcoin mantra of like Bitcoin is for everyone, like even people you don't like, and that's like the point of Bitcoin. And I came across, of all people, a talk of Peter Thiel talking about like how culture sort of became very sharp in culture war.
Yes,
this idea of like having a ticker tape parade for Satoshi Nakamoto. I thought it was a good idea, but I thought that someone more real would be way better.
Well, that's exactly what I thought. I thought, yeah, let's have a ticker tape for an imaginary person. No one knows if they even exist.
I like Satoshi, but I felt like someone who went through the ringer would be great. And like it just hit me like a ton of bricks that I was like, oh, it has to be Aaron. Like that's like the one we can elevate to hero status and almost like martyrdom.
We stay away from the martyrdom.
Yes,
because martyrdom is when you die for a cause.
Yes,
he did not die for any cause.
Yes, no. Yeah, that's
So you
but he was definitely
throw that stuff
persecuted.
out.
He was, yes, correct.
Yes.
But he was definitely persecuted, and someone that I think a lot of people still care about. And I was actually, I was hoping that the progressive tech pros would really want this statue to be put up. I was pleasantly surprised that the quote unquote right wing tech pros also liked it, in the sense that I think there's hope. My hope with this is that there's a middle ground saying internet values matter despite all the differences, and it's I guess it's sort of like, it's a weird position to be in, as in like maybe everyone hates me because I'm trying to like be a centrist in some way, but I think those three things matter so much for, like, these are civilizational primitives. Like be able to communicate an idea, be able to retrieve an idea, and do that privately are so important. And the point of the statue is, remind people of those things, and remind people of internet values.
Yes, it was literally John Perry Barlow's. When he had to write, the nurse was asking him if he wanted to write about his life or something. It was really funny because she didn't actually realize who he was.
Yeah.
This is something she said to all her patients. And Barlow said, a good man, not a great man, but a good man who wanted to make sure that one person could get a message to anybody else, anytime, anywhere, uninterrupted.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's such a basic thing, you know? Yeah. He was thinking of that as his life's work. It's something that we fight for all the time, you know, and it's very important. We do have to look out for people wanting to do things in Aaron's name to pretend that they are associated with him.
Yeah.
And there are some people who shall remain nameless who have done that over the years. And when that happens, I just have to clear it up and, you know, kind of thing. So that's the only thing we look out for, like those assholes that were trying to do a coin, you know, like an Aaron Swartz. Yeah. And we can't stop it from happening when it happens, but we can at least let people know that it had nothing to do with us, nothing to do with the family. It was unauthorized, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's all you can do is, you know, and then go on with their lives because you can't control other people. But, you know, so what gave you the idea of a marble statue? Like,
I met this guy in New York who was working on this company of like trying to reduce costs of like stuff like this for either statues or like facades of buildings, and to be able to restore old buildings. And he showed me all the stuff that he was working on, and I just was like, wow, I just stumbled and like correct. Actually, the guy did type of thing that I was looking for to have to make a statue of. And then
you worked with his mom?
Great partner. Yes. So I talked to the mom first. I was telling her that sort of there were some pieces together of what could be done. She was excited, but she gave me like one caveat. Said, "Do not do anything illegal. Don't put it up just random places." And I agreed to that. And she gave me a bunch of pictures of him, all her favorite pictures. We worked with an artist to make like a very cool 3D render, a cat file. His name is William. I'm blanking on Daniel Williams. Sorry, it's on the statue website. It's
he made the statue, Daniel William. So, okay, great.
Yes, he made the design, and then they had robotic arms carved into the marble, about like 90% of the actual shape of the statue, and then like for the rest of the bust was just by hand polished by the same artist. And it's a cool design. The design is open source on aaronstatue.org. Anyone can download it and create their own. I have mine right here.
Hold that up. Hold that up for a minute.
Yeah, it's totally for free. So, like there's
and so it was robotically carved.
Yes, for the most part. I think
cool.
Like 90-something% of it. So it's I think it's very fitting for a tech pro to have a robotic arms carved marble.
Exactly. It's exactly fitting. Yeah. And especially like, 2025 statue carved by robots. All right. Yeah.
Can you
I
show
love
us the bust a little more?
robots.
Sorry?
What,
Can you
Andre?
show us the bust a little more?
Yes, of course. There it is.
Yeah, there it is.
Nice.
Yeah, and it came out good, and it was a good picture of him that you picked, and that's all we can hope for.
Yeah.
Really bad statues of other friends of mine have been put up. Just
Some of
people
those
that aren't thinking
so bad and become memes, and it's it becomes a thing of its own. But no, I wanted to have a very handsome picture of him.
Yeah, we wanted to look like him too. We
of
just
course,
wanted it to actually look like him and be something that his mom likes, which is really important because I do the same thing, sort of loop her in ahead of time before we do things. His mom is really she really pays attention to things in the world now. She was radicalized a little bit from this happening, understandably. And she really likes to be a part of these projects. So I was really happy when I first heard about it. And you mentioned that you had sent that you were talking to.
That was the first person I talked to. It was like so important.
It should be
to get it right.
It's really and it's too good because when people write me first, I have them clear it with Susan. And then Susan will say, "Oh, talk to Lisa," and I'm like, "Well, really, Susan, you're the one that has to like it, So I was really glad with the way it came out. Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit about this upcoming event. Internet Archive, December 7th, 6 p.m. in-person event. Just to be clear, there will be an online component though, and we're going to have online. We'll have people. We'll have screens up so that people can talk to people during the party and stuff. It's this sort of funny thing we kind of do where you're like at the party, but you're a webcam at the party, and it started, I want to say 2014. It was Secure Drop had 2 tables and they were doing their hackathon, and Garrett Robinson couldn't be there in person. It must have been 2015 then, because he was there in 14. Anyway, he couldn't be there in person. But when I was talking to him, he goes, "Hey, can you bring me over to the table?" So I brought the computer over to the table, and he was like at the end of the table, and the people were on the other side of the table. And I just left him like that for like an hour. And I came back and they were still all talking. It was like he was sitting at the end of the table, on the laptop. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is an Aaron Swartz Day tradition for sure. And so now we just kind of do that at parties. We'll just have a lot, it's like, if you want to talk to the world, they're watching the party, and then we have and just so that people know, this is only on one side of the foyer. So if you don't want to be on camera,
you're not going to be live streamed.
You're not going to be, you're going to be on the other side. And we're very clearly, and we have anybody that doesn't want to be on camera also wear a lanyard with a thing on it. So we won't get you in our shots because we're going to be filming a lot at the event and we don't want anyone to be in anything they don't want to be. I'm going to be collecting together videos from a lot of interesting people that if they couldn't be there in person, then they'll send a video, and we're going to have lots of food and lots of people there. And anything else you want to say about it?
Invite your friends, invite like other techies. I think it's a good event to try to get techies on, remind them of internet values. And that's the whole point of this. Invite your friends and
bring your friends,
techies.
RSVP if you can, but if there's people that just want to tag along with you,
that's fine.
We'll let you in. Yeah, it's not like you have to RSVP ahead of time. And that's actually how it happens a lot of time, is that somebody's just on their way and they kind of scoop up whoever's around them.
The RSVP, I guess, is sort of like for me to have a little sense of how much food I need to get. That's basically it. Like, if you just show up, it's fine.
That's what it's for,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think so far about 300 people have RSVP. So it should be a good amount of people coming.
That's
So
great. So even if
hopefully
only
more
half
people
of them come, which is all we always plan on, only half of the people that have RSVP'd, that's still 150 people. So it should be a good time. So I wanted to make sure that everybody
and
knew about that.
I was surprised that even people told me they were flying in for the event. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be incredible, and it'll be the first in-person event that we've had since 2022. That Aaron Swartz Day has done, at the Internet Archive. So we're sort of making it a thing where it's just like, come, all these people that wanted me to do in person in November, and I wasn't able to do that, will come to this event, and it's sort of like Aaron Swartz Day and the unveiling all at once. So is the statue at the Internet Archive now?
Right now, is going to be returned at the archive. Is with a conservator who's fixing some last second things on the statue.
Okay.
But it'll be ready next week, and
all right,
plenty of time for February 7th for the unveiling. The plan is to have it at the archive for a couple months until I get approval from the city to get it installed in a public park. So I'm just going through the legal procedure of doing that, and hopefully we can get it soon. That my plan right now is getting approval from a park to get a temporary installation, which might be temporary. Doesn't mean short time. It can be a 5-year temporary installation.
So somewhere in San Francisco City.
In San Francisco. I think it's very important that it should be in San Francisco, which is like, is the internet capital.
Aaron hated San Francisco. I just have to say that.
That's fine.
He hated it. He wouldn't want people to think that we were putting it in San Francisco because that was his favorite city or anything. I just got to say something. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
But
I think he would admit that it's the internet capital, and I think it's a good place to remind people of internet values. So.
Yeah, in different ways. I mean, it's basically Silicon Valley that's killing the internet right now. And so it's very ironic, that
we need to persuade them.
Yeah.
No, we need to do it despite them. I don't think we're going to persuade anybody to do anything out of the goodness of their heart. We'll have to do this, despite them. We can't, or their time for persuading is over. They've had enough time. If they really felt in their heart to do the right thing, they would have come around already. And so it's past all that now. And we basically have to do it despite them. And that's kind of what decentralized web is all about, in the sense of having connections that we control. I am very pessimistic about the decentralized web because I think it's just going to be a matter of time before somebody buys it, because we're in this age of oligarchy now. And so even the decentralized web has some major players now that everybody's using, and I worry what will happen when those inevitably get bought. So we're really a race against time kind of thing in terms of trying to set up open methods for doing things. So we can, switch over. Meta made that very disturbing announcement. They're not going to fact check anymore. So we got to get rid of Instagram. Facebook already died a long time ago. Twitter's been dead, for a year or two now. So in terms of having places where we can actually have conversations without just being harassed by people that do not have a good faith intention of conducting actual discussions. We need some new platforms, and they need to be decentralized. And so it's important that we pretty much just need our own stuff now until we can and make them want to be players in our thing, more than us trying to ask them to please be nice on their thing. I think we can safely say that's not going to happen at this point, and that they will take it, they'll exploit every avenue that they have. They don't care how it looks. They don't care about the right thing to do. Those days are over. So that's, as we talk about unveiling an Aaron statue, we need to remember what he fought for. And his whole point was, you fuckers, we're not going to go down without a fight. So now's the time to fight. Not fighting silly, not fighting for no reason, not going to a protest just to get our ass kicked. That's all silly stuff. We're going to rebuild our own internet protocols, decentralized web, so that we can communicate with each other in a secure way and nobody can stop us. And then we'll figure out how we're going to take it from there. Right?
Yeah.
But right now we're still doing that. We still have to do that part. We've got signal. So at least we can talk, until the quantum computers can go back in time and crack all those files that they've been storing in Utah for the last 10 years, right? Which is happening. That's another ticking time bomb. So you can go in a time machine, as Ed likes to call it. Then they can go back and charge you for shit you did years ago, that you talked about, on Signal. So we need to figure out, which hasn't happened yet, to be clear. I'm talking about quantum computers that won't exist for, I don't know, maybe 5 years. It's not going to be that long. So one of the first things quantum computers will be able to do is crack our current encryption. And we know that. And it's they just have to improve the software for all the guesses that it makes to filter out the bad guesses. And then it's making, like hundreds of thousands of guesses, and it's got the software for filtering out the guesses, and then it can start cracking shit. So it is around the corner. Unless we have this is what I say to people, does this mean we have to have our open source quantum computer somewhere? I mean, what are we really saying, right? And the chances of that are nothing, because you have to have billions of dollars to even make something that, make a first generation quantum computer.
I think there are people that are working already on encryption systems that will be proof for
the elliptical curve stuff to protect against that. If people are using that in addition to RSA, most are not, right? So that's the issue there. So I'm just saying,
an update to to the SHA encryption, SHA 256, right? But I don't know. I guess I'm more bearish on quantum computers, and I'm not that much worried. But maybe I'm wrong.
Can I ask you a question?
You don't have to be against quantum computing to be worried about the inevitable encryption issues when we read it.
Yes.
Okay, it's not either or. That's the wrong way to position it. Andre.
All this discussion got me thinking, is there going to be a plaque or some kind of sign saying what the statue represents and what's the text? So
yeah, we'll need to be involved on that, me and his mom, because the plaque is where everything can go wrong, just so you know. I've had to redo plaques at places like the Exploratorium and stuff, and they do it, but it's a process.
Right now, it has an encryption on the bottom. It just says Aaron Swartz, the internet's own boy. And that's about it. I think the plaque should reflect something about the internet values. I need to still work on the column and installation and all of that. So I think the plaque will come in once we have a public park installation.
Yeah, and they'll tell us, they'll tell you how long it can be and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, definitely need to make it, and probably the plaque with your website on it that can have a longer description about.
Yeah, totally.
What went behind it. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about this project. We're super excited, and we'll see you on February 7th, 6 p.m. Internet Archive, San Francisco. All right, thank you, Pablo.
Thank you.
Yay. Okay, cool. So now Gavin Grimm is going to and you're welcome to hang out for the rest of the show if you want, Pablo, if you want to hang out a little bit. Okay, sure. So now, Gavin, the moment we've all been waiting for, give us our climate change update. Oops, are you there, Gavin?
All right. So
taking a deep breath.
My connection, which looked fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Oh, it's just your connection lagged a little bit. Okay,
it looks
no
like
problem.
My connection is lagging a bit.
That's okay.
But should be okay, hopefully.
No problem. Take it away.
Are you hearing me at this point now? It sounds like
we can hear you perfect. Yep. We can hear you perfect.
Okay. So So most of the information that I'm going to be discussing, you can find available in many sources online, but I'm going to point people in the direction of Copernicus. They have just a high density of this kind of information, and they also have the year of the climate report dating back to, I think, 2022 or maybe 2020. And they, of course, have one for 2024. A brief preface I do want to offer. You're not going to hear me report positively on much, if anything. Speaking of Brazil, perhaps one small light in the darkness is that Lula is less intent on destroying the Brazilian rainforest. So that's really great. So that, that's one of Earth's very vital life support components is the Amazon rainforest, and maybe that'll stick around a little bit longer. But in general, there are not any trends to celebrate in the wider spectrum of the data. There are individual breakthroughs and individual technologies which have small scopes of usage. And those things are great, but as far as the health checkup of our planet, there is very little to say that is positive. So I'm going to go over a couple of data points here. This is a non-exhaustive list of some of the most important warning systems our planet has. And I've selected these in particular just because they're, I think, easier to understand, have implications for all of us, lots of data, just easy, digestible stuff. But further reading is, of course, always encouraged. So first of all, we have our polar ice minimums and maximums, the most ice we have at any given time in the year and the least ice we have at any given time of the year. In the past decade, those numbers have been trending really severely in the wrong direction. Our polar ice maximums tend to be a lot smaller than they have been historically, and our minimums tend to be a lot larger than they have been historically. And so in the warmest parts of the Arctic season, we're having much more melt and much less freezing than we historically can hope for. And even during the coldest parts of the season, that is seeming to remain true. Just looking at some of my quick facts here so I don't say anything completely wrong. Another mention of the Arctic boreal region has switched over to be a net carbon source rather than a carbon sink. That same information has been reported in recent years with the Amazon rainforest, it especially because of the incredible amounts of wildfires burning down those important ecosystems. The Amazon rainforest has in the past few years been theorized to be more of a carbon sink or a carbon emitter than a carbon sink, or a structure that takes carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it into the ground where it can't really hurt us in the short term. It's basically a pretty severe uphill battle to maintain some of Earth's life support systems as they are currently. We also have record global sea surface temperatures all the way down to 2,000 meters beneath the water. We have absolutely smashed records for the hottest oceans that humans have ever recorded. There's data to suggest that we haven't been this hot since the Eemian period. And of course, that means that coral reefs are at extreme stress. They're bleaching. They are dying out very rapidly. Warmer water can hold less oxygen. So in particular, where I live in Virginia, we have an anoxic stretch off the east coast of North America, where fewer fish can live simply because there's not enough oxygen dissolved in the water around them for them to be able to breathe. And so people are having to go further and further out to fish, either for just feeding their families, or in the case of North America, more often for commercial fisheries. The global land surface temperatures, the seas have been extremely hot, and in fact, most of the incoming radiation from the sun is absorbed by our seas. Around 90%, 89-90% of that heat goes directly into our oceans. And I think it's around, let's see, I believe I wrote it down. I think it's around 6% that is absorbed in land, 4% in ice, and 1% in our atmosphere. So our global land surface temperatures have been absolutely astronomical. The last 10 years of human history have been all 10 have been 10 of the hottest years we have recorded in human history. The transportation system in the Atlantic Ocean that basically it's a massive conveyor belt where cold water melting off of the glaciers up north sinks down, and it pushes hotter water up and creates a sort of conveying system. It does a lot of things. It distributes heat across the ocean, and so it doesn't overstress any one particular area with too much cold or too much heat. It also stirs up nutrients. It redistributes nutrients at the bottom of the ocean to the top, and so forth. So I think it's the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or the AMOC, it has been in the news recently quite a bit because it's been observed to have slowed down. This conveyor belt system has slowed down. I believe, let's see, what are the most recent numbers? I wrote that down as well. I think we are seeing a slowing of, I wrote down 15%, which I believe itself is a fairly conservative estimate of how much it has slowed. There are some estimates that put it closer to 2025. And so what are the impacts of this? Well, it seems fairly certain. First of all, if everything continues as it has, which is we continue pouring carbon and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we continue deforestation, rapid loss of biodiversity in the planet, we continue to pollute the air, the water, and everything around us, there is no version of the future where a magic force somehow allows the AMOC to continue functioning. As far as what does it look like if the AMOC completely ceases to function or shuts down to such an extent that it is no longer functionally useful in its historical role, we don't have time machines, but to put it incredibly mildly, it would be absolutely devastating for the global climate, and it would be absolutely devastating for the cradle of life in our oceans and for all of the ecosystems there. Something I think we often fail to consider is that there is no version of reality where the Homo sapiens survives without the biodiversity that allow us to live every single day. If all of our food sources disappeared tomorrow and our raw material sources, if these things went away tomorrow, we don't have the ability to print nutrient pellets to keep the species alive. We are utterly dependent on the planet we live on. Which especially wealthy people who I think will get on Mars before we have to worry about the desiccation of our own planet seem to forget very often. The other thing that this climate calamity is causing, we see the jet stream, the ring of air pressure up in the north around the Arctic. Historically, it's been a pretty clear delineation of Arctic cold air and warmer air beneath it. And if you may have heard in the news recently that the jet stream is weakening. The jet stream is weakening. Instead of being a nicely shaped circle or disc, so to speak, it's now wobbling, and you're getting deep bends and troughs. And in these systems, hot air and cold air interact with each other in ways it does not normally when the system is stable, causing extremely unusual outbreaks of torrential rain, pockets of unusual drought or heat. From the bottom up, our climate system is flashing an alarm on every conceivable level, saying that we are, if we're not already past the point of stress, to have any hope of securing a future that looks even a little bit like the planet that we were all born on, then we are very, very close to that limit. Another thing to mention with regard to this information, The horrifying fires in California right now are, and we also mentioned bird flu, which, surprise, that has to do a lot with climate change as well. The horrifying fire conditions we're seeing currently, Southern California, and indeed I think most of the Western United States, is in an unprecedented dry stint, even though I believe it is the wet season currently. There's a phenomenon that some scientists are referring to as weather weirding, where you have very dry periods during traditionally wet times of the year. And then you also have storm systems that have, so for example, a hotter atmosphere holds more water. We have about 5 to 7% more water on average in our atmosphere for 2024. That means that when you have torrential rainfall in an area, that area might be used to getting 2 or 3 inches of rainfall, and they might get as much as 8 or 9 or 10 inches of rainfall because there's just more energy in the system to dump more water in those places. So you'll get places like, in fact, this happened last year. We had very dry conditions in Southern California. Wildfire sparked out of that, and it was directly followed by torrential rains, the likes of which people seemed relatively surprised by. Rain that was up to people's stomachs in their homes, in areas that had never, it had only been their ditch flooding in years past. So that's this weather weirding effect, where extreme dry periods are becoming more dry and extreme wet periods are becoming more wet. And when you lash an environment with both back to back, there's just not enough time for the earth, the plants, the vegetation, the soil itself, the animals that live there. There's not enough time for the ecosystem in the area to sort of prepare for this phase change from very dry to very wet, in the way that traditionally the land would have if that difference was less severe and over a longer period of time. One of the other points I wanted to make here, bird flu. Bird flu, like COVID-19, is a zoonotic disease. It's a disease that begins in animal populations. For those curious, well, why are we seeing a rise in these kinds of illnesses so suddenly and recently? With climate change, there are populations of animals. There's climate change, and then of course our incredibly massive industrial factory farming practices that put millions of animals on top of each other in unsanitary positions. And because we are driven by a profit incentive instead of health and safety, you're really hard pressed as a farmer to say, man, my chickens are sick. I better cull my entire source of inventory or my entire source of income for the next year. I better kill all of these animals that I've spent money and time and effort to raise. It's not an appealing offer to people, and we don't really have systems in place to offer, a subsidy or any kind of response to, oh, well, I've lost my entire income for the year. So the nature of our factory farming is incredibly bad for
to encourage
healthy living populations of any creature. I would agree. And then the second issue we have is that as animals are leaving their native habitats because they simply cannot survive there any longer, you have animals mixing in populations that have never come across each other before, which gives new opportunities for diseases to leap from population to population and mutate and ultimately enter the human population. So a reminder for everybody listening that cares about the planet that we live on, it is very, very likely that 2024 was the hottest year humans have ever known to exist during human history, during the time that humans have existed. 2024 was the hottest year on record for the oceans, for the land surface temperatures. And in fact, we have the 1.5 degree Celsius Paris Agreement signed, I think, 2014, 2015. And we haven't technically crossed it because that relies on a 10-year rolling average. But let's see, 2024 was indeed 1.6 Celsius degrees above the 1850 to 1900 IPCC baseline for the temperatures we're supposed to stay within to continue to live on a habitable planet. So despite how hot it has been, it may very well be that everybody alive right now will never see a cooler year on average for the rest of their future life. And I say that because I think it's incredibly, incredibly important to drive home that the losses we have already suffered for biodiversity, for the continuation of humanity itself, are absolutely enormous. But if we don't act as though every fraction of a degree of warming, every species we can save, every drop of water, fresh water, we have to act like all of these things are the most important thing, because they are. This is the planet we live on. Without this planet, none of us live here. We're dead. And so the house is indeed on fire, and we should be acting like it's on fire. Everything, in my opinion, should be utterly shut down until we can promise a habitable planet. And I want to make one more important point on this. If I haven't taken up too much time already, to mention the Global South.
Take your time.
I want to acknowledge that the Global South is the place most directly affected by, thank you. It's the place most directly affected by this climate catastrophe unfolding in real time in all of our lives. And it's a place that needs the most ability to develop. It needs historically, nations like America, other incredibly wealthy imperialist nations have underdeveloped the Global South in a very intentional way to keep us in a politically advantageous place to reap the rewards of their resources. And so now, while we're saying, okay, well, we have to go carbon neutral like yesterday, we can't be adding more carbon to the atmosphere, I want to acknowledge that the nations that are hardest hit by climate change in the Global South are going to have the most difficult time adapting to this new, very dangerous world we live in. And we need to also prioritize eking out whatever possible carbon budget, if you want to call it that we have to develop these nations and their infrastructure so that they're protected from even more of the worst calamity that we're already seeing befall these nations, who are the least responsible for all of these conditions and are taking the most in direct financial losses, in the destruction of their cities, and the pillaging for natural resources by nations with more economic power than they have. So I do want to acknowledge that the Global South is bearing the brunt of this disaster now, which has allowed us in the North to feel like it's a future problem, but it's very much a now problem. It's not our grandchildren's problem. It's a now problem. It's anyone born, within the last 30 years needs to be really worried about what the rest of their life looks like, because the planet, at least the planet I was born onto in humble 1999, no longer exists. And that is, there's no tech bro breakthrough that's going to change just the physics in our system. It's energy out, energy in. The Earth has, for years now, taken a lot more energy in than it has been able to successfully radiate out via our natural processes. This is called the Earth energy imbalance, if you want to do some further reading. And it's really a simple question of physics, thermodynamics. We really depend on moisture, and the moisture being in the correct places, in the correct levels, and oxygen and heat, and all of these things being in a very comfortable stasis. But the planet wasn't always in this very comfortable stasis. In fact, for most of its history, it really wasn't. And it's very possible that we can drive the planet out of this stasis entirely by human activity alone. And so, and that's not fringe science. That is very well understood, incredibly well studied data that you're piled up to here with this kind of information. It's not difficult to find. So, the update for 2024 is it was a very bad year for the planet itself, and it also may be the most peaceful year the planet sees for a long time. Some very early evidence of that is that in every single day so far of January 2025, our ice cap amounts, how much ice we have on the planet, which is a very important cooling system and pretty much our only remaining, it has been a historical low for the species, for the planet. Every single day of January 2025, that low has broken records for every single year before it for the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, etc. every single day of January of 2025. So we're already starting 2025 by breaking lots and lots of records. Unfortunately, not the ones we want to be breaking. So perhaps those people who are beginning to realize, wow, it's like unbearably hot where I live for 40% of the year now, and that's not what it was like when I was a kid, and other, or perhaps you've lost your home completely. I think we're going to be dealing with a much more nomadic way of life in the future for those of us who manage to hang on, where you know it's not feasible to have all of your most valuable belongings in a home that could burn down or be flooded, etc. And at least in America, I can't. It's difficult to see people coming to terms with that in a reasonable way. So it'll certainly be interesting to see. But in the meantime, at least I am committed to doing what I can. And granted, individual actions are small, but very important when the stakes are so high. It's the planet we live on. So that is the 2024 sort of climate roundup. Go to Copernicus or literally any more intelligent actual scientist for better information. But for the
Don't
layman,
downgrade yourself. Yeah,
that's basically what we're
You're
looking at.
great.
And there really is no.
Yeah, my question is this.
Well,
my
I
question is
appreciate
this,
that.
and I know it's delayed.
I just want to stress, really stress that there's no.
No, say what you're gonna say first. Go ahead. What you really want to stress.
Yes, I just as a final point, I really want to stress the wealthy people that are promising carbon capture. That it's a foolish conversation to entertain. Carbon capture will be important in the future if we want to maintain a habitable planet. But first and foremost, we have to stop putting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, period. That is the single most important thing we have to do to preserve life on Earth, not just for our species, but for every other species that depends on oxygen and water, which happens to be all of them nearly.
Yes, and the bad news for us is we can't let everything else die because we need everything else to live, which is, you should not want it to die because it deserves to live too. But if you want to look at it from a self-serving human perspective, it's still in our best interest to save everybody else because then we get to live too. My question for you, Gavin, which I know will take you a minute to hear, is that, so what should we be doing when we get off of here and we're like, oh my God, I just heard this climate update. I want to do something. What do we do?
Yeah, so what do we do? That's a big question, and I think honestly the answer to it, in many cases, is very personal. So to back up for a bit, just for a moment, the concept of the carbon footprint. I believe it was BP, maybe Exxon. They spent a lot of money to come up with that idea, the carbon footprint. You individually should recycle. You individually should walk instead of drive. You individually should avoid plane rides where possible. And I'm not saying that taking any step you possibly can to reduce your carbon imprint on the planet is not worthwhile. But that concept was created so that we wouldn't point the finger at who is unequivocally the real sort of villain in this story, which are the fossil fuel companies that lobby for years and years and years. These companies knew for a very long time, since the 90s at least, that the burning of fossil fuels was going to lead us down this path. They knew it. They spent money to obstruct and conceal that information. They spent money to force the public to focus on, again, personal actions like recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle, that kind of thing. And this is what we have to show for it. So first and foremost, we have to identify who's doing this to us. It's a fairly small group of people and companies, and they are directly and personally responsible for this utter destruction. The second thing I think we should do is take steps that we can to reduce our carbon impact on the world, just because it's the right thing to do. But then perhaps more importantly, we have to be prepared for what our future is going to look like on a planet that is not what any of us have come to get used to. It is no longer the case that living somewhere guarantees that you are safe from this kind of climate emergency or that kind of climate emergency. It is no longer the case that, oh, I live in a good city, so I should be able to find bottled water or shelter resources if a hurricane or another natural disaster takes out my area. We still have people in North Carolina affected by, I think Helene it was, that are still they're still displaced. They're going into the winter, it's cold, it's freezing, and they still don't have a place to live, clean water to drink. We are entering into a very dangerous time to be a human being, or any other living creature for that matter. And how we respond to that has to be with empathy, with love, with openness, with flexibility. And you don't get those things in the face of tragedy if you're not having these conversations with yourself, with your loved ones, with the people you care about, with even just your community broadly. So what we do in this situation, we educate ourselves as much as we can, educate our friends as much as we can, and start building community supports that are going to be very important in a world where the things and processes and entities that have historically taken care of us after disasters and such, we have to prepare for these to be overwhelmed. We have to prepare for these things to not serve our needs anymore. And it's also along the classroom to escape this for a lot longer than people who are not wealthy are going to be able to escape it. But at the end of the day, everybody has a house that can burn down. And if you don't, you've got a neighborhood that can burn down that you live in. You've got a shelter that can burn down. And there is nobody safe from this not impending, that implies that it's not happened yet and it's coming. We are currently living through the early days of what I believe very strongly to be a climate breakdown on this planet. Even if we pull the car around and we meet every target we promised to meet tomorrow, the degradation of the planet is to such an extent that the amount of suffering globally, on average, has already increased pretty dramatically. And that amount of increased suffering is already unacceptable, and it's already something we need to be doing something about. So, fight your elected officials. Don't let them get in there and promise to end fracking and then run away from those promises. At least don't let them do that without a lot of pushback from the public. That's a great
example.
We have to hold elected officials accountable to their climate promises, and every time they make it. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was very disappointing to see all of these climate promises be run away from. And in fact, Biden was responsible for perhaps the most progressive climate bill that the United States of America has ever seen. And it was also an absolute drop in the bucket compared to, first and foremost, what he campaigned on with his promises. And second of all, what fundamentally has to be done to save the lives of everybody listening to this right now. It is as existential as it can possibly be. So there's a part two to my question of what do we do? This part is optional. But I actually think that the more people who are more in your face about how everything is already changing and is going to continue to change, the better. So if you feel so inclined, feel free to do the sandwich board thing and walk up and down your street and say, everything is on fire, and see if anyone will talk to you. Because I really genuinely think that everything we can possibly throw at the wall still barely gives us a chance to maintain the lifestyles that we're used to, if it even does yet at this point. And so everything is worth fighting for. Absolutely everything is worth fighting for. There is no reason that celebrities should be getting passes for, taking a private jet twice a day everywhere they go. There's no reason that we should be comfortable with wealthy people contributing 99% of the destruction of this planet.
Yes.
That the rest of us have to live through, while the wealthy people can largely escape, or at the very least postpone the consequences of.
So it's everything from local things, helping in the summer. Actually, I still do it, but I really do it in the summer. You know, I pass out a lot of water, just a lot of water to homeless people, you know, that on a hot day, like, you know, there isn't enough water and stuff like that. And so it's little things like that to just help what's already happening, like you said, to try to help the crisis that we're already in. And then a question of trying to take this seriously in such a way that we can better prepare for the consequences of what's coming. I'm going to wait a minute so you can hear that. Does that sound right?
I heard only the first part of that.
Oh, so I said it was local. It could be small things.
I think I need you to restate the question, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. I'm just wondering if we're talking about small things and big things, whether we're just trying to help the homeless people that are dealing with like increased heat, or whether we're trying to prepare for a whole city being out of water.
Yes, it's all of the above. It's everybody. Nobody can do all of it. Everybody who cares will find where they are most effective. And maybe you're most effective by helping maintain the local homeless shelter and putting in extra hours when the number of residents there increase. Maybe the best place for you is in science communication, educating the public about the dangers that are presently playing out across the planet. Maybe your role is advocacy for the global south to say, look, these people did the least to contribute to this calamity and are affected the most severely so far. There is space for everything anybody has the ability to do. We need it all and then some. We need it all. I will say an important, for me at least, an important grounding sort of central idea here, even if you are not yet a climate refugee, you are literally, I mean, it's a matter of a dart being thrown at a board for whether or not you could potentially be next. So anybody listening who has not prepared themselves for the reality that tomorrow their house could be gone and they need to know, if that happens, what do I do? Where do I go? Who do I call? If you don't already have that safety plan for you and your family in place, even if you think nothing happens near where you are, even if you think it's impossible, we have infrastructure built 50 or 100 years ago all across this nation or longer for a planet that no longer exists. That is just the bottom line. And it's not going to be, I mean, the government and the agencies that they have will step in to some extent. We've already seen massive failures in responses. I mean, we saw the failure in response to Hurricane Katrina back in the day. People died on their houses because of government negligence. We have to realize that we have to take care of one another. And that starts with us taking individual responsibility for keeping ourselves, our things, our local community safe, and it builds out from there.
Yes. And we really have, you know, they tried to cover up Hurricane Katrina at first. You were probably pretty young at the time. I think it's 2005. But this was actually Anderson Cooper's activist moment, which is, you know, he's not always rocking the boat, Anderson Cooper. He's usually, we're just the rockin' New Year with Anderson Cooper. But there was a specific day where they were saying everything was fine and they weren't letting the reporters past a certain place. And Anderson broke through the thing, broke through the guard and was like, people are dying. People are dying. You can see them. They're floating in the water. There's people on their roofs. This is happening. This is not what they're reporting. And he calmed down after that in the following days. But he had lifted the veil, you know, and then he kind of got his composure. And then everybody jumped in to tell the real story. So everybody has their moment you know, even when you are arguably a sort of status quo broadcaster like Anderson Cooper, who I watched elevate from the middle of the night during the 2000 elections to what he has become now, you know. And in 2005, Katrina was about to get covered up, especially in the beginning when you could actually save people if you got your ass over there to save them. And I had friends of mine driving to New Orleans with supplies, you know, and sneaking around patrols and stuff. You basically had to get through the patrols to get the supplies to the people, you know, and that was here in the United States in 2005 with Katrina. And that was because George Bush had made his good friend Mike Brown shoot, I can't think of our emergency organization that we have here. Shoot, I can't think of the name of it, but he'd given it to his friend who didn't know anything about it. And that's when everything, you know, went awry. So, you know, I really appreciate you starting a conversation today. FEMA, thank you. It was FEMA. So he had this idiot in FEMA for several years at that point, who basically did next to nothing while he was in. And then when Hurricane Katrina happened, all hell broke loose. And people died and stuff. And it was definitely our government's fault that they were not prepared. So here it is. Oh my God. 20 years later, I can't believe it was 20 years ago that Katrina happened. And our disaster game isn't much better.
Well, and I just want to jump in at this point and say, this is a perfect example. Our government knows that this is what the stakes are. It's not a matter of, oh, the people up top just really don't understand what's coming. They absolutely do, and they've done the calculations, and it just makes them more money to act the way they've been acting so far. And so we have to ask ourselves, who and why and where, what choices are being made, and who do they benefit, and who are making those choices, and what can we do?
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting and informative. And really looking forward to having you on the show in general and our shows to come. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Gavin. Andre, always great to have you on the show. We will get back to more actual Aaron history and stuff in the upcoming shows. And Andre is actually like sort of an Aaron Swartz professor. He's literally been studying everything that Aaron has ever written and analyzing his life, charts and graphs and reports, and just really diving into all that. And you should watch our episodes from last year where Andre really gives some really great, discussions about these historical Aaron writings. And he also has a really good explainer. If you want to know, we sort of gave you part 2 of the Bolsonaro situation, but if you want part 1, we have a wonderful video of that too from last year that you can see on the channel, where he starts at the beginning and sort of talks more about who Bolsonaro is and what happened, and also the striking similarities between his campaign and the disinformation tactics of his campaign and the disinformation tactics that we saw in this last election. So they, they take notes on each other and stuff. And we just kind of got lucky that these people in the Bolsonaro coup that just happened kind of didn't do their homework a little bit and got thwarted. And we have to remember that, with coups, that they don't always, somebody just had a coup, darn it. Was it Venezuela? Somebody
South Korea tried also to.
South Korea just had a coup for a couple hours, and the generals got the guy in a building and was basically like, yeah, you don't want to do this. And so he just said, okay, I take it back. And the whole thing was over in like a day. So this is just when people that want more power think they see their chance and the stars are aligned and maybe the army will support me. and let's go for it. It's the only chance they're ever going to get, because it's generally people that really wouldn't have a chance any other way. They don't have enough skills to do it the normal way. Their corruption, they've got enough corrupt people behind them to support them, but their corruption stops a lot of the bigger people with more power from supporting them, because everyone wants a sure thing in a coup. Nobody wants to back a bad coup that isn't going to happen, you know. And I do think, see, our January 6th event is a little more complicated because he had just lost the election and he didn't have the army behind him, but he did have a lot of the Capitol Police behind him. There were, what am I call it? Moles. We had moles and things in our institutions that were helping them. And those situations were very coup-like, the way that things happen during a coup. And that other point, Andre, you brought up about whether that was a tester, you know, maybe they would have done more in the days that followed if January 6th hadn't been hit with a pretty negative reaction by everyone except the people that were trying, you know, that were there, kind of thing. We don't know what he would have tried to do, but I would say, I think January 6th for them was pretty effective. I think they got a lot done, frankly. And they were able to keep that momentum with the hate and the rhetoric and everything through the 4 years to get those people to vote in the election. And America having no memory always helps. And now here we are again, only it's going to be even worse this time. And we'll have to see, you know, how that goes. And I'm trying to look at it a little detached, like more of a academic or something might look at, you know, watching America, you know, spin out into fascism and Nazism. And I think the dangerous thing right now, and Pablo, this has a little bit to do with what you were talking about as far as the tech bros. The danger is that technology up to a point was sort of on the truth and freedom side, the tech people. But now the billionaire tech people are like, oh no, this is where we come in and take over, you know, in a lot of ways. And there's things, you know, we can't stop someone buying a social media platform. Money, rules, you know, Twitter had to let itself get bought when it had such a ridiculously high offer, because they always have to do things for the shareholders. And that particular scenario, I don't really ever seeing a way to fight back against, right? Yeah, it's got to be an open platform that can't be sold. And, you know, there's a lot of things in history that we think can't be sold and then they sell them. You know, the CD database many years ago that people put their time into for 5 years and then they just sold it right out from under us. There are lots of examples of that. And so we really have our work cut out for us in terms of communication platforms, social media platforms, being open in such a way that can't be sold. And how we're going to advance technology. You know, I love AI and robots. I have another podcast with a humanoid robot. That's my day gig. And I've been waiting for artificial intelligence since I was 5 years old. And I'm watching Star Trek. So I love artificial intelligence. But, and Biden's administration really screwed up in terms of regulating either in an effective way, right? They basically just didn't do anything. So the other side, anything the other side said sounded better than nothing, right? Which is all the Democrats were saying was nothing. So it's going to be a shakedown in a lot of different ways. And I do think some positive things could come out of it. Not these people that are saying it won't be so bad and maybe good come out of it, blah, blah, blah. It will be bad, but still maybe something could come out of it if we pay attention and work really hard and don't get drawn into these conflicts that don't really matter. You know, a lot of people are trying to argue about things, and I don't spend any time trying to convince anybody of a civil rights thing, for instance, anymore. If they're confused about it, they're asking me a question on Twitter, like, I don't have anything to say to you if you're that confused at this point, right? We're not going to win over people that already don't get it. They were raised in a different way and stuff like that. How are we going to do it despite them? That's what I'm kind of have been hearing all day today is how are we going to do this despite them? And if there are any projects where we can actually get them to donate to our things, yeah, okay. But then you might be beholden to them in different ways that you don't want to. I very famously, only famous with the people that know me, don't take a lot of funding for Aaron Swartz Day, for instance. I've had all sorts of offers from places that I didn't want to be and didn't want Aaron to be connected to. So that these are the battles that, you know, we'll be fighting in terms of trying to build things without losing control of them. But I'm optimistic, and Gavin, really, especially the climate change report. Well, actually, the other thing too, just really good food for thought to think about in terms of how we going to approach politics differently in this year. How are we going to approach climate change, both pragmatically and politically, in the coming year? And really a lot of great, oh, there's the cat that you warned me was going to come into the picture at some point, but she never did. But yeah, she's got to be close by. I can hear her. Is she there? Can you grab her? No? Okay. All right. So I just want to say thank you for everybody. And we will see you again next month. I'm not sure of the date yet, but we'll let you know. And remember to come see us all February 7th at the Internet Archive. All right.